What's going on? I don't like making these types of videos. I really mean that, especially on these topics. But I'm going to talk about John Kirby, National Security Communications Director, was on a news channel talking about how Hezbollah's command structure was wiped out. So just for people who, in their day-to-day lives, someplace, they don't understand what that means necessarily. Is if you look at the structure of a government, and in this case, the interpretation, the narrative, is that this is Hezbollah is not a government; it's a terrorist group at war. Um, so that's another conversation or something. But if you look at the command structure, you are wondering how a nation responds and is able to respond, what they would want to say and what they are able to do in the real world to respond to any sort of foreign or external action, and how they're capable as well of managing those things internally. And so, like, a more practical example of this is if you isolate any smaller period of the conflict. It looks like it's just Israel and Hezbollah, Lebanon, launching missiles back and forth at each other. And that's probably what it is, too. That's what's happening right there. But it's also like saying, like, Israel, will say, like, if we strike in the north, then we're not all that concerned with the fact that you're launching missiles at us from the closest part of our borders, right? If we strike you in the north, what this should be interpreted as is that we're still eager to reach some other, whatever it is, we're concerned with how you're managing the government and your capabilities across sort of maybe the strategic plane, and we think there's a resolution to that because otherwise we wouldn't be doing that. We would be doing something else. And so when a nation hears something like this, when they have this, they see the news reports, they have their own commanders and stuff like this, are checking out the damage, they're seeing what actually happened, they're trying to understand how Israel did this. Well, that information usually floats up. You'll get some sort of summary that operates within the chain of command, and they'll say, well, look, based upon this, these are sort of the preparations that we should take. These are sort of the capabilities that we should be ready to respond with, and these are the other foreign actors that we should be able to reach out to and try and drive this conversation forward. We should be able to somehow respond to this as well as react to this. And so when you say a command structure is crippled or destroyed, what this means is it's not only talking about how someone actually makes the decision to continue a conflict. You're talking about how they learn from the conflict. You're talking about how members of Hezbollah's militant arm, because Hezbollah is a lot of things, you're talking about how members of Hezbollah's militant arm are able to continually understand what's happening in the conflict and what's expected of them. So you're talking about this learning process, this knowledge and stuff like this as well. You're talking about answering this question perhaps a certain way. You're talking about almost this proprioception, where you're understanding where things are at and all this other stuff. And then you're also talking about leadership and strategy, right? And so, when you're talking about, whoever it was, someone, I think it was former PM Bennett today, was on some channel and he said Israel is a nation of lions, right? And so from the military context, what you're ultimately talking about is all of these very critical and important and essential functions that are happening, but you're also talking about how a leader can strategically, almost take this bubble, right? And what they're able to do is sort of plan out how the next phase of the conflict will go. And they're able to silo and contextualize where diplomatic strategy and where conflict goes, right? Where's their aggression and where's there something else? And, and are we together, and what gets really interesting is when you say something like, and I think this is, sorry if I'm not former military, but this is pretty military, when you're able to say, like, hey, look, you know, uh, Ben, you know, I can get Ben on the phone or send him a love note or something like this, and it's like, hey, look, I'm fascinated about what we're gonna learn together about this stuff, but I'm also working on this stuff, right? And so you have these sort of connections, right? These various connections and shapes that are all building this strategy out, working into capabilities and all this other stuff. And eventually, this isn't like people think you can stand up with this stuff, but it's really just like asking, if you're gonna try and, this is my philosophical reflection, or like this is almost like a natural religion sort of way to approach this. But it's like, okay, I know I'm gonna go out and ask to influence 1,000 or 10,000 or 1,000,000 people. So if I'm operating on this level of strategy and a large organization and within an existing culture and trying to work within that structure and manage how we can do this and all this other stuff, um, this is why I'm just some dude, right? I'm just some dude talking, right? I'm not a political leader or anything like that because I don't want that. I don't want to have to ask these questions in this way and all this other stuff. But and so like thinking strategically, it's a better way to approach the world because you could imagine that when you're in those, if you are like you're the leader of a political party or something, or you're the leader in a conflict, you're one of the leaders in a conflict. You can just imagine there's lots of consequentialism that happens. There's lots of consequentialism that happens that impacts other people, and they're necessarily going to have an opinion about what happens and what you're doing, right? And so, like, the really simplistic understanding is, we all just push forward together, but that never actually works. That doesn't actually work in the real world. At some point, you're going to pay for the things that normally what people say is the things that you didn't do or you weren't able to do. And so when you hear a podcaster say Hezbollah's head was cut off, it's sort of correct. It's talking about an event that happened in the real world, and it's also saying that no one, no one's clear how intelligent, intentional decisions and strategy will emerge from Hezbollah right now. And then the other thing that people can say is if you say the command structure was crippled, what you're saying is that you are at best responding to a stochastic and chaotic random series of events, and that's how people should interpret this. And so, and whatever, everyone, right? It's 2024. Everyone's a nation of lions, aren't we? No one's not a lion, and so, just don't mess up. Put your strategy in the right place, kids. Crash into it. All this stuff. Don't look too mean about it. So there's a horror movie, I think it's called Let the Right One In. Ain't that one kind of funny? Ain't that a son of a bitch? I think so. I'll put some prayer on that one. Yeah. I think there's some idealized form of someone who could like run a conflict or something like this. You can run a strategic platform and stay current and all this other stuff. And what does that actually look like? What it actually looks like is you trust that basically the hierarchy, you trust that the hierarchy and what's happening in the real world, the actual sort of from A to B value chain of when things are happening, is able to fulfill the need that it's been required, and it's able to become somehow stronger or better, if not larger or smaller, because of this, right? So, and that just gets really tough because as soon as you start talking about a conflict, about taking someone's life away, now all of a sudden you're signaling to your brain biologically that this is something that's somehow existential. So, this should be something that's really important. And does that make sense with anything else that we talk about in a civilization? Maybe it doesn't, but Um, yeah, you know. The other thing I was thinking about is just how, like, imagine, if you run or you become a heavyweight lifter or something like this, your ligaments grow out and all this other stuff. And that doesn't necessarily mean that you're always signaling to someone else. You're like, you have that reflexive and reactive sort of motor reflex from those connective tissues. Nothing's consolidated. And so it's just fascinating because if you're talking about, a maybe like, and this is, who knows, this is maybe philosophy. You have this beleaguered government without any sort of norms or, values or anything else attached to it, who deeply feels the need and commitment to participate in this type of conflict. And then you are asking, well, should we build these types of connections which are necessarily violent? And if they manage that aspect of the conflict better, you imagine there's some advantage. But then you just put this in the context of modern industrial society and war. If you want to say imperialism or something, go for it. And you are wondering, well, if I just look at this giant mountain in front of me, am I solving anything? And so, yeah. I'll end it how I started, with the news that there is this strike in the first place. We should be able to work with anyone at any time, and we're not there yet, obviously. We're not there yet, so we should be able to work with anyone at any time. That's it, period.